Hello and welcome. I'm Professor Lukas, and today we'll continue our look at studying, which can be crucial to success, and yet is done inefficiently by many. Last time we examined some problems with the most common study methods. This time we'll examine types of methods and talk about which ones work best in which circumstances. This information is adapted from Chapter 5, Understanding and Remembering, in the textbook I wrote, College Composition and Reading, Information and Strategies. As we went over in the last video, the three most common methods of studying, rereading, highlighting, and cramming, all have some pretty serious problems and are not the best use of your time. However, there are other ways of doing things. One is to see what gets you motivated to spend the time and what gets you excited about the subject. The more you care about it, the easier it'll be to remember. While we will talk a bit at the end about various ways of setting up your study time better, right now we're going to focus on three main types of studying: rehearsal methods, elaboration methods, and organization methods. Rehearsal methods consist of rehearsing or repeating whatever it is you want to remember. It does have several advantages. It's simple, easy, has a light cognitive load, which means you don't have to work at thinking, and it's an effective way to study the basics. On the other hand, it's important to keep in mind that this type of study method has a limited application. Repetition helps you recite what has been memorized, but it doesn't help you construct meaning from the information or relate it to what you already know. Rereading, flashcards, and other rehearsal methods reinforce individual ideas, but not the connections between them, and you end up with rote learning, where information is memorized rather than understood. That isn't to say that these kinds of methods are totally useless. There are many areas where rote learning is actually necessary, mostly when memorizing the basic foundational facts of a subject that can then be built upon. Memorizing the basics lies at the beginning of many areas of learning, from learning the ABCs, phonetics and times tables, to the periodic table in chemistry, anatomy in medicine, cases or statutes in law, or memorizing basic formulas in any science. For learning the basic, rote learning can be optimal, and thus rehearsal methods are good for studying this type of subject. Rehearsal increases the likelihood that the information you're trying to remember will be stored in your memory, because your brain is built to remember things that you encounter over and over again, and forget things you only encounter once. However, science has shown that the more connections or links there are between ideas, and the better organized those connections are, the more readily an idea can be recalled and applied, as we saw with schema theory. So, rehearsal methods are often not the best for anything besides memorizing long lists of basic facts that aren't meant to be used or analyzed, such as memorizing the names of all the muscles in the body for a nursing class. Basically, while rehearsal methods can be great for memorizing facts and basic formulas, they tend to be ineffective when working with a complex subject at an advanced level, which is most of the type of information you'll be working with in college. You'll notice this course doesn't contain any lists of terms or facts or formulas to be memorized. Honestly, there's only so far just repeating information to yourself will get you in college as a study method, since there's often more of an emphasis on understanding, analysis, and application rather than on memorization. After all, reading the words on a page does not guarantee that the facts represented by those words will be remembered or understood. We might recognize them as familiar, but be unable to retrieve any useful information. If you do have a subject that warrants the use of rehearsal methods, some simple rehearsal methods are based on repeating or recopying the information you're trying to remember through strategies such as rereading your textbook or your notes, rewriting your notes, or using flashcards. There are some things you can do to be more effective when using rehearsal methods. The first is to make sure the topic you're studying is one that is appropriate for rehearsal methods. Is it enough to simply memorize the information, or do you need to understand it? If understanding is needed, you should choose a different type of study method. In addition, the more you practice or repeat the information, the more likely you are to remember it, so don't just rehearse once. If you're trying to remember several things, you should repeat all the items instead of just the last one, so that you're going over all of the information instead of just one piece, reinforcing all of it. Another important aspect we'll discuss more a little later is spreading your studying out over time, rather than doing it intensively the night before, which is much more effective for remembering. While you should study the night before, you're more likely to remember if you've studied over time, leaving 1 or more days between study sessions. Mix up the order in which you study your notes. People are likely to remember the first thing they study and the last thing they study, but forget the information in the middle, so it's best to study your notes in a variety of orders. Elaboration methods consist of extending or applying the information, putting it in different words or a different perspective, and this helps store the information in different pathways in the brain. You create a visual or verbal connection to what you're trying to remember, or apply it in some way. Because information is more meaningful to you, it's remembered better. In addition, these methods give you retrieval cues, which will help jog your memory. Instead of simply repeating information like you would with a rehearsal method of studying, effort is made to organize the information and relate it or associate it to information that you already know. This is a far more effective means of studying. There are many advantages to elaboration types of methods. The most important is the fact that because this method leads to creating strong and varied connections, it leads to the easiest recall and ability to use the ideas. In other words, these methods help you to both remember and to understand. However, that doesn't mean that these types of methods don't have their drawbacks as well. The primary difficulties with elaboration methods regard the effort, time, and skill involved. It takes a lot of thinking time and mental energy to accomplish, and it's easy to get distracted. Personal experiences can lead you astray from the actual main topics, or you might make mistakes in applying the topics or forming questions without realizing it. Some examples of elaboration methods include writing an example, answering difficult questions like why or how, making personal connections, or creating and or taking practice tests, or creating a mental image. Your brain remembers pictures and other visual information more easily than verbal information. Predictions are another type of elaboration method. One of the most common types of an elaboration study method is the use of mnemonic devices, which is just a memory aid. Some common ones include acronyms, first-letter phrases, or rhymes. For example, many students memorize the order of the planets by learning the acronym that was remembered with the phrase, "My very educated mother," for Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. When I was in trigonometry, I learned the phrase "so ka toa" to know how to work with sine, cosine, and tangent. Many people memorized how many days each month has with a rhyme that begins, 30 days hath September, April, June, and November. When I was a kid, I was able to remember our phone number and give it to others because it was the local prefix, like 555, time. Some use "never eat shredded wheat" to remember the points of the compass, starting at the top with north and going clockwise. Music teachers help students memorize the order of treble clef lines by remembering "every good boy deserves fudge," E, G, B, D, F. Whichever elaboration method you use, you want to try and make the associated phrase or image funny, vivid, unique, or meaningful, since these are easier to remember than something plain or boring. So then, while rehearsal methods are super easy, they tend not to be very effective. And while elaboration methods are extremely effective, they can also be more time-consuming and difficult. The third and final type of study method we'll be looking at is a kind of happy medium, easier than elaboration, but more effective than rehearsal. The final category of study methods we'll be looking at today are organizational methods. And, as I mentioned in the last slide, these are often the best balance between effort and effectiveness for most of the material you will deal with in college. Organizational methods work by creating connections among the information that's being presented for meaning making. It helps you organize the meaningfulness of new knowledge for easy storage in long-term memory by consciously thinking about how the pieces fit together with your background information. Our memory works best when the information we're storing and retrieving is well organized and well understood. To demonstrate the influence of organization on memory, see how long it takes you to recite the names of the months in alphabetical order. Although the names of the months are used frequently and are well memorized, disrupting their typical organization makes retrieval a much more arduous task. Imagine the impact of poor organization on information that isn't nearly as familiar. Organizational methods focus on two things: putting information into meaningful groups or categories, and connections between those sections or categories. Organizational methods have a lot of benefits and advantages. For example, as you create a summary or outline, you are consciously generating links among the ideas. You're thinking about the ideas, relating them to what you already know as you work to group and connect the information. And new information linked to your network of ideas will be more easily remembered and more easily used in different ways. In particular, writing a summary requires evaluating the information to determine what is important enough to include, and transforming long, detailed passages into short statements about the gist. Since it requires actively thinking, organization methods are effective study methods without taking as much time, skill, and effort as elaboration methods. In addition, the mind map, outline, or summary can be used many ways, including as a basis for rehearsal methods of studying. Organizational methods help you integrate the information into your mind, connecting it to itself, as well as to related previous knowledge. This makes it so that individual facts don't need to be memorized. The structure of organized information helps you fill in the missing parts, giving you something called retrieval cues to help jog your memory. After all, our memories work through association, as we already saw. Really, the only possible problem with organization methods is if you try and create a summary or outline through copy and delete type methods, where you're just copying some sentences and deleting others to make the summary. Since this doesn't require much thinking, it's not as effective. The summary or outline should be mostly in your own words to be useful. You do have to actually put in effort to get the payback, but this is a minor price to pay for an effective and efficient study method. Some examples of common organizational study methods are summaries, keyword outlines, or graphic organizers such as tree or spider diagrams, or mind maps. A mind map is often created around a single word or text placed in the center, to which associated ideas, words, and concepts are added. Major categories radiate from a central node, and lesser categories are sub-branches of larger sections. Sometimes these are known as clusters and can be used for brainstorming as well as for studying. These tools can give a visual summary of a topic that preserves its logical structure, with lines used to show how the different parts fit together. My tips for this type is simple. Because of the advantages, this is the type of studying you should do most often. Ultimately, students should identify their own study preferences, what works for them on a consistent basis, and act accordingly, says education researcher Ashish Raknar. For example, some students study better in the morning, or can better focus in smaller chunks of time rather than a marathon session. Knowing exactly what does and does not work on a personal level, even tracking study patterns and correlating it with related grades, and then proactively creating a study plan and schedule around the proven effective methods is the most powerful study tool of all. I think this advice is the most important of all. Try different things and figure out what works best for you personally, as well as for the type of information you're studying. However, there are also some general tips I would like to share that apply to all different types of studying. Many have to do with your study environment. One is to study in 20 to 50-minute chunks. It takes time for your brain to form new long-term memories, and you can't just keep studying flat out. Just like your muscles seize up and don't work if you lift weights for too long without a break, your brain does the same when studying too long. Take breaks of at least 5 to 10 minutes and do something physically active to get your blood flowing and make you more alert. Do a few jumping jacks, run around your house, play with the dog, whatever it takes. Do just enough to get yourself pumped, but not worn out. Another somewhat surprising piece of advice is to make enough time in your schedule to get enough sleep. Think of it this way. If you sleep only 4 to 5 hours, you'll probably need to double your study time in order to be as effective as if you had gotten 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Study more and sleep less? That doesn't sound like a good idea. Get a good night's sleep every night, and you'll be making the best of your study time. A related point is staying up all night cramming for an exam has been shown to do very little good for test preparation or performance. Not only does sleep deprivation turn students into zombies, but it also takes a serious toll on happiness and overall well-being. The best way to avoid pulling all-nighters is to study ahead of time. It's easier said than done, but the only way to avoid pulling an all-nighter besides not studying at all. Dedicate a few days a week or more to study and review the material to avoid trying to cram everything into that brain in one night. You also want to pay attention to your study environment. You should pick a place where you feel comfortable, but not so comfortable that you risk falling asleep. You also want to be free of distractions, making it easy to concentrate. The place where you study should be relatively quiet. Traffic outside your window and quiet library conversations are fine, but interrupting siblings and music blasting in the next room are not. Generally, you want the environment to be as quiet as possible. Some people like to listen to music, which can be okay, but stick to instrumental styles with no lyrics, and try studying without music to test whether you're more efficient that way. On the other hand, keep the TV off. It's too distracting. Basically, you want a quiet, uncluttered place, free of distractions. Study smart. Don't just read the material from beginning to end, stopping to memorize each new fact as you come to it. New information is acquired much more easily when you can relate it to material you already know. For example, when you're beginning to study a new chapter, it'll make the information it contains much more meaningful and easier to learn if you first take a few minutes to read the introduction, the headings, and the first sentence of every paragraph, and the chapter summary to get a good idea of what the chapter is about before going on to read the chapter as a whole. Word for word, these portions also contain more information that is likely to be asked about on a test. Try and focus on the most important information. Focus on important and simple ideas first, important but complex or time-consuming ones next, and complex ideas that are not vital last and only if you have time. Prioritize. Also, psychologists say alternating study topics, rather than cramming on a specific one in a single session, leaves a deeper impression on the brain. So don't grind on the same subject all night. Change it up, take breaks, revisit the material in intervals, even spacing it over a period of days if possible, which has been proven to enhance retention even further. You should also take advantage of your learning style. Think about what you already learn and remember easily. Song lyrics, choreography, pictures? Work that into your study habits. If you're having trouble memorizing a concept, write a catchy jingle about it, or write lyrics to the tune of your favorite song. Choreograph a representative dance. Draw a comic. The sillier and more outrageous, the better. Most people tend to remember silly things more than they remember boring things. If you're a social person, start a study group. Take advantage of what the science has shown and replace rereading and highlighting with practice tests and outlines. You will learn the information faster and better. Finally, my last piece of advice is to avoid procrastination. Every student is guilty of procrastination at one time or another, but just because it's common behavior doesn't mean it's acceptable. Procrastination can lead to doing things halfway and not retaining as much information as necessary to ace that exam. If you're pulling frequent all-nighters or rushing in fire drill mode to finish every essay or project, then it's time to work on time management skills and schedule an earlier and calmer study session. Volumes of research point to the irrefutable fact that practice spaced out over time is far superior to practice that is massed together in time. Somehow, it's easier to accept this fact when we think about athletics or music. If we wanted to prepare for a piano recital, nobody would need to tell us that practicing 1 hour a day for the week before the recital would be superior to practicing 7 hours the day before. Nonetheless, when it comes to classwork, we often fail to apply the same principle. Take advantage of this Space your studying out over time to help learn ideas more solidly. In a study of 10 common study methods, the 2 that were by far the most effective were taking practice tests and spreading study sessions out over time. Take advantage of that. I hope that the discussions and information presented here were useful and helpful in giving you a better understanding of the tools at your disposal for studying and how to be more efficient and effective in your studying. This ends the lecture on studying smarter using schema theory. Check out the previous video on schema to find out why these methods work well or don't. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that this overview was helpful and illuminating. Please don't hesitate to contact me with any question you may have about the material. I am always happy to help.